Many people consider Loki the most hated god in Smite. This video will show you the top 10 reasons people hate Loki in no particular order. Number 1. Counterbuilding. While counterbuilding is necessary against many gods, Loki takes it to another level. Loki not only requires the solo laner he's usually up against to counterbuild, but pretty much everyone else on the map as well, with the exception of the support and usually the ADC. Mid and jungle both at least require some kind of physical defense and often health on top of that, just not to get one-shot by him. At the same time, counterbuilding is not at all necessary for Loki himself. He has a standard build that he can pretty much always utilize, and that works pretty well in almost all situations. There are some varieties, but none of them really make a difference in terms of his play style or the damage output against certain targets. Number 2. Sound play. Sound play is a technique utilized in order to gain more knowledge about the positioning of your enemies and their current actions. While sound play is helpful against any god in the game, it's pretty much mandatory against Loki. It's the only way to follow him in stealth because you can hear his footsteps even when you can't see him. Other gods don't force that level of sound play. Why is this so annoying, you ask? Well, a lot of people like to listen to music while playing the game, or they're in a call with their friends who they talk to. Both these things make sound play a lot harder and make it more annoying that this specific character forces it while no other does to the same extent. Number 3. Easy and proxy farm. Loki has one of the easiest and safest clear in the game once it comes online. At that point, he can not only clear your wave without actually being near it, he can actually proxy farm you behind the tower without having the risk of actually walking too far behind it. This makes lane against him extremely obnoxious because you're basically not fighting a lane opponent anymore and he's free to rotate at least most of the time. Number 4 and 5. Split push and teamfight. Typically, you will not see Loki in a teamfight very much. Instead, he will be split pushing your towers and trying to take down your Phoenix on his own while you're busy somewhere else. Loki excels at this because his kit is geared towards it, and at the same time, his teamfight potential is relatively low. This gives him the impression of being unfair compared to other characters, simply because he doesn't really follow the rules of the game in the way that he doesn't transition from a solo phase into a teamfight phase. A Loki alone is enough to bring a whole team down if he can't get controlled. The fact that he doesn't do so by fighting you, but fighting your structures instead, makes it rather annoying because no one really wants to play PvE in Smite. The reason I made this 2 points at once is because it not only affects you as his enemy, but also his teammates. His teammates are constantly stuck in a 4v5 while Loki's off doing Loki things basically. So in the end, you might end up with 9 enemies on the map when playing Loki. Number 6. Escape potential. Compared to many other solo laners, Loki has extremely good escapes. Not only does his ult give him a free combat blink, but his stealth mechanic is almost unique in Smite and extremely strong. While sound play allows for counterplay and you can maybe predict where he's walking, there's still no actual counter mechanic like a stealth ward or similar, which makes the stealth with the slow removal on top of it an extremely strong escape mechanism. Ganking Loki can be worth it at certain points of the game, but more often than not is less rewarding than ganking other lanes. Number 7. Single target burst. No matter how team-oriented the game gets, in the end, gods will often be valued by their potential to 1v1. Loki excels at this, and that makes him extremely annoying to deal with for newer players who are often stuck in 1v1 situations. He has boxing potential against almost any characters aside of extremely tanky ones, and he can pretty much one-shot squishy targets. Even if he can't really do much in coordinated teamfights, this is often perceived very differently by players playing against him. Number 8. Relevance when behind. And nope, I'm not talking about standing behind your enemy here. I'm talking about the fact that very few characters stay relevant for the game when they fall behind in levels. An example would be Odin, who still has his cage. But a better example is probably Loki. Loki can always split push. As long as he's got his core items online, he will be a nuisance to your team. It doesn't matter if you ganked him 10 times before and he's completely behind. He can still split push because he doesn't really fight opponents. Talking about opponents brings us to point number 9. Team coordination. Due to his design, Loki requires extreme team coordination from the enemy team. This makes him a popular pick in almost all modes except for competitive, as you usually require a high amount of communication and coordination in your team in order to make it work against him. At the same time, his own team does not require the same amount of coordination to work in his favor. Last point number 10, low skill floor. Before I get jumped for this, quick explanation of skill floor. Skill floor is the amount of skill required to play a god decently and to utilize his kit fully. There's also the skill ceiling, which is the point where you cap out on learning that god and you're basically a master at him. Loki has a low skill floor. He doesn't have a low skill ceiling. Especially with the auto attack cancel, there's more than enough potential to go into the depth of the character. However, the basics are really not hard to learn, and it can be very rewarding to play him early on, especially when the opponents cannot cope with him yet. This makes him a very popular pick among beginners, who then get quite overconfident and cocky with the character, basically playing him all the time and behaving in a slightly obnoxious way. I'm not saying this in a judgmental way, it's just what happens with the design of the character. Another example of this would be Thanatos. If you constantly pop stomp low-level opponents, you will get an ego at some point, and you will think that it always works that way for you. In conclusion, Loki is hated so much because he's pretty much designed to be hated. If you pick this character, you usually know what you're in for. You don't really care in most situations. Is that a reason to hate the players who play him? Probably not. You probably still will when you're in the game against them, but in the end, you're the one who has to come up with a strategy against them, and it's a good way to learn the game and have a decent challenge against you. He also teaches new players better team play, better map awareness, and better counterplay and counter building, all at the same time, so he's a free teacher. However, it's still understandable to struggle with Loki. I will have a video in the near future, which will be linked right here, explaining how exactly to deal with Loki. I'd also like to point out that the game shown here was anything but challenging, and matchmaking was completely broken, so sorry about that relatively poor footage. I couldn't really do much about it. Matchmaking will be another topic for another video, probably also linked here. Thank you guys for watching. DukeSloth, out.